to episode 9, Cybersecurity 101 with Joe and Larry. Today, Larry and I are pleased to have on the show Bob Schlotfelt. Good morning, Bob. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Hey, it's
Good
my
morning,
pleasure
Bob.
to introduce you to Larry Lishy.
Hey, Bob, how's it going, man?
Good, Larry, and you?
All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I was just telling Larry how excited I am about this podcast. I've got pages of questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of it, all these discussion topics.
Okay.
But I'm super excited about this conversation. If you don't mind, just to introduce yourself a little bit to our guests, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Bob Schlotfelt. I've been in and around cybersecurity for 20 years or more, and IT for more years than that. Started at the bottom years and years ago as a mainframe computer operator, so I know the basics, and then came up through the ranks. Been involved in cybersecurity full time since we'll just say the turn of the century, which makes us all sound pretty old. So it's been a good ride. I've been put into positions where you have to be very technical, many times very political. So it's been a fun ride, but it's been a good journey, and continuing that journey. I'm reaching toward the back end of my career, so trying to share what I've learned along the way, and continue to foster the relationships that I've gained along the way, including Joe Stalker here on the call, and just met Larry, and looking forward to that relationship as well.
So, Bob, we're so excited to have you on the show. You've held just a number of pretty amazing positions at a lot of companies, a lot of different industries. You know, you've been a CISO at many organizations. One organization, it had over 100,000 users, multi-billions of dollars in revenue. You've seen a lot of security events. You've managed through the storm many times through crisis management.
Yes.
You've managed people, you've hired people. You just have a wealth of experience. So there's just so many different ways we can go. But since I have so many questions, we're going to kind of do lightning round a little bit, just so we can get through a lot of the questions.
Sure.
And then, Larry, if there's any question that really pops out to you that you want to double click on and go deep on, I want you to just jump in and go deeper with Bob on any question that you want to just tear into. How's that sound?
Oh, that sounds awesome.
All right. So first question is, so Bob, you already mentioned you got into basically the industry many years ago. Initially, it was mainframe, but what was it that initially drew you to technology to begin with? And for someone who's just getting into IT, can you kind of looking back on how you got your break? Was that a connection? Was it networking? What was it that allowed you to get into IT to, way back when to begin with?
Wow, that's going to date me a little bit, but back to the mainframe days. I was working for a large savings and loan, which we don't have savings and loans anymore, in their loan servicing department. And it was a small group of people, and the IT data center was in the same building. And so got to know some of the guys that worked back in the data center, including the data center manager, a guy named Larry Bullock. Great guy. We got along well. Had some beers together, played Pong together, which, okay, I'm really dating myself. And then he approached me one day and says, "Hey, you ever have any interest in being a computer operator?" Never thought about it. My dad was in IT years ago, but never thought about going down that path. And so he interviewed me and hired me to train me to be a mainframe operator.
Got it.
I told him,
So for you, it was kind of that you had a connection with someone who got to know you personally,
correct,
and then gave you an opportunity, a chance, right? So,
yep.
and that's the hardest thing, right? For someone to break into IT or a new career, a new industry, mm-hmm. Sometimes someone has to be willing to take a chance on you, right? I mean, that's because you don't have a certification, you don't have prior experience.
Nothing.
Someone's just got to know you and go, you know what, I think this person can get it done, right?
Correct.
Have you ever seen someone and seen the potential in someone and given them a shot? And if you look back on your career, how did that work out?
Yeah, when I was working and I was already in security, I was working for a large engineering firm out in Pasadena. There was a guy who was kind of a temporary guy that we brought in to the help desk to basically answer the phone. That was it. He was on the help desk. He'd answer phone and reroute the calls to the proper technician or whoever was going to help with that. And I I saw that John, he had a good head on his shoulders, and he was hungry. He wanted to, I could see he was trying to understand what he was talking about rather than just answering the phones. And so we pulled him aside and said, "Hey, John," and this is at a time when I was the data center operations manager. So he was under my organization, small as it was, and pulled John aside and said, "Hey, we've got a position where we're trying to come up with a desktop technician kind of role. All of us have PCs on our desks connected to the mainframe. Laptops were almost unheard of at the time. And we need somebody that can go around and just help people get set up and make sure they're connected right and hook up monitors and the drill, crawl under the desk and plug in cables," and gave him that chance. Last I heard from John a couple of years ago, he's the director over an IT technical organization, has a team of about 60. And so it happens, and it's just a matter of, right, you got to, if somebody can see you're hungry and you're willing to learn and you get that exposure, sometimes you got to do that grunt work. You're going to be crawling under desks and pulling cables, or, he was part of a team. This is a fun story, anecdotal. We had a data center that was like so many I've seen in the past. There was the subfloor was a mess, cables everywhere, not labeled right. And John was one of those guys that helped us come in on a weekend, basically, hold on to your hats here, Joe, pull every cable out and recable the whole data center so we knew where everything was going. And we had to put with probably half the cables under there weren't being used. We got them out of there.
I've actually done that a few times.
Yeah.
I've held a few roles. I've actually done that a few times. So I know what that takes. You got to be extremely diligent in everything to track everything. Do you think, looking back on that, so he basically got in kind of at the ground floor, had to do a lot of the grunt work and everything. But Bob, is it possible for someone who has extremely strong leadership and management skill in another industry to transition directly into a leadership role in InfoSec or cybersecurity? Have you ever seen that happen where, maybe it was a COO or someone in a different role kind of become a CISO? Or is that possible? Or do you have to come up through the InfoSec, the traditional technical track? Do you kind of have to work your way up to just be a leader in InfoSec or cybersecurity?
I would say no, because I see that person every day when I look in the mirror.
Okay.
My first, let's go ahead back and kind of roll up to where I started and got to today. Been in IT, et cetera, et cetera. Working for a large service provider. I was working for Pro Systems at the time. My role as data center operations manager. I was a PM, so I had my PMP. I was doing projects for them, just basic, almost like business analyst type role. The DC ops director said, "Hey, we've got an opening for an operations manager." We had two operations managers for the data center. One handled the day-to-day interaction with the DBAs, the sysadmins, the people touching the gear, all the network gear. And then on the operational side we had data center operations projects, the help desk, handling what we called security at the time, which really was access control, physical access control, as well as the help desk and user access control. It needed somebody to manage that. So I got tagged to be the other operations manager. So I hadn't spent much time down in the weeds, working, pulling cables, except for, little sub projects, and I was managing projects. So I was then put into an operations management role, and had underneath me the access control piece, which was my first real foray into security. So it was access control, physical access control, user management of a small shop. We ran 24/7. It was a firm that bought and sold the electricity and energy for the state of California.
Okay. So Bob, when you're hiring someone, you've been a hiring manager, you've interviewed dozens and dozens of people over the years. What do you think it takes to be successful in security today? If someone hasn't ever done security and they're wondering, okay, I wonder, do I have what it takes, or what is it going to take to be successful? Looking back, what are kind of the common attributes in someone if you look at all the successful people that you've ever hired, what were those kind of common attributes, and therefore, what do you look for when you hire someone?
For me, it's a lot about personality. It's a lot about, is the person the kind of person that can think outside the box? I got interviewed one time by a guy. He's a good friend of mine now. It kind of happens. I get people I work with, they become good friends. He was asking questions about what kind of musical instrument I like to play. It had nothing to do with security, but what it did was it brought on what kind of mindset a person has just in their own personal life, in their own how they carry themselves. So if you look around somebody's office or somebody's room, it's like, okay, they're into baseball, or they're into music, or they're into travel, or whatever.
Yeah.
What skills have they learned doing that they can apply to security? Because in my mind, security is a lot of out of the box thinking. It takes creativity. Yes, you're going to see people say security is all about policies and standards and following a strict path of performance and a strict path of compliance.
Right.
But then on the other hand, and Joe, you see this in recent years, we'll say go back 4 or 5 years, the whole antivirus community got flipped on its ear when things started becoming polymorphic and not just signature based. And everybody's going crazy on how do I deal with this? And it took those companies that were out of the box thinkers, as well as leaders and my security engineers and architects saying, all right, these traditional tools we have aren't working. We're seeing the signature, but sorry, but the barn door is already open and the cows are in the pasture. It's too late.
Yeah.
And so it's the out of the box thinking. And going back to my initial analogy, it's like, yeah, somebody learned to play a guitar by themselves. My son is one. He learned to play a guitar, but he had a issue with holding the guitar, so he learned to play it left-handed by himself. Okay, so out of the box thinking.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, the other thing that can make an IT department incredibly successful is diversity, right? And people coming from backgrounds, that bring different perspectives in a troubleshooting scenario and that sort of thing. Larry used to be a coach, and at a very successful level, he went all the way up to work in the Oakland Raiders in the NFL. And so when you have someone who's in a different area of life, accomplished so much and been so successful as a coach, as a leader, and that sort of thing, I see great potential in Larry. That's one of the reasons I love kind of just working with him on this project and this podcast and everything. Is I know he's going to be incredibly successful. I just want to be part of a story to see, exactly like the So, Bob, what is the NFL of cybersecurity? What is the top echelon? I've heard that there's CISO positions out there that are hiring at 600 to 800,000 per year, because there's just so much raw demand for security right now. What does it take to get to that elite echelon in InfoSec upper management?
One, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Two, a lot of people are in a position where they have a vast amount of knowledge and experience. So start publishing is the key. Start putting yourself out there as a valued opinion. You put yourself out there, and it's networking. And so anybody out there who's looking for that kind of position, because I know of other CISOs who leave one position and they have 5 other offers before they pack up their box and walk out the door, because people know them out there and they want them. There's network people. I know I've got a list of people in my little personal, we'll call it Rolodex, that if I went into an organization and I needed to rebuild a team, and it happened to me once in my career, I got hired in and had to rebuild a team. I open up my Rolodex and I've got a dozen or so very skilled, very talented network and security professionals I can call and say, hey, I've got this position, I've got this team I'm trying to build. Are you interested? And to my surprise sometimes and humbling, they say, I don't care what the position is, Bob, I want to come work for you again.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that says
everything. So Larry, like in your case, if you wanted to start a team or you're going to build another organization and you have other coaches you've worked with, said, I don't care what team it is or where it's at, but I want to go work with Larry again.
Yeah. I still get offers and to coach overseas in Europe and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, Bob, I have a question.
Sure.
So is it important to get your certificates, or is it important? What's the most important thing? Can you just start off like the one guy, just start off just as a regular IT guy? You just pulling cords. You're just doing the hardware part of it.
And that's a great question, Larry, and it's gonna go into another path here, which we'll talk about. It's important at some point to get certifications because it shows that you've done the homework and you've done the book work.
Okay.
But and I'm going to relate back to your career within football. I would say the same thing about baseball. I would rather have a person who's got 5 years experience getting drugged through the mud and going toe to toe with folks than somebody that has got 6 certificates and really hasn't seen the war yet.
Right.
Years ago, I had an interview, and I've driven this through a few organizations. They'll put together a job description, and job descriptions you see anymore for security professionals, they want a unicorn. They want somebody that knows everything and has got certifications and a PhD. I had one that's actually they PhD preferred. I'm like, excuse me? and organizations I've been with, they say, well, we want to make sure the person has a bachelor's degree. I said, what's that got to do with security? Really, what's it got to do with security? I was like, I would rather have somebody that's got 5-6 years experience than a degree and 2 years experience.
Got it.
So to me, and in sports, and I love that you've got that background. It's going to be a lot more conversations later. In sports and in security, it's more about the experience and what you've been through than it is the the education and certificate. I had a guy in my last organization. He had 14 different certifications in and around security, the CISSP and all of them. He was very book smart.
Yeah.
And we've all run into people in our career that are very book smart, but you drop them into a situation and say, hey, here's a server, and we're going to install the latest semantic antivirus on it, and we need this rack stacked and put in the data center. And they look at you like you want them to do heart surgery. It's like, no, that's your job. That's your job. It's something it's required for this job. So
Bob, what information, InfoSec's certifications do you think Larry should be pursuing for that first entry level role?
I got my CISSP and I stopped there. And that was years ago. I've been practicing CISSP now since 2003. So back then it was like the crown jewel, and I was again on the management side of the world. I'd have to go look at that one, but a few of the ones that he talked about that are good. I know that Microsoft has got some tools and some certifications in their platforms.
But to your point, I guess you're not necessarily hiring based on people's certs. You're more, you look at that experience, you look at their personality, their character, and then you look to build on them and invest in them, right? Correct.
And it's one of those things where if you want to get your CISA or CISSP, those are great. They're the ones that people look at like, whoa, took a lot of work. They've crafted the CISSP a few years ago. There's a lot of the SANS certificates around security. SANS are very expensive. I mean, so if you got an organization that's going to pay for it, great, go for it.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it's funny, Bob. I was looking back at your resume, and I actually got my CISSP within 6 months after you got yours.
Now, let me ask you this question, and you can edit this out of the podcast. Please do. Did you pass the first time?
I did, but I'll tell you what, I was so terrified of the exam that I studied for 6 months before I took it. And I read there's this thick book.
Yeah.
I read it twice, carefully and slowly.
Yeah.
And this is one of those exams that if you read the book carefully and slowly, and you have a lot of prior InfoSec experience, back then you could pass the exam.
Yep.
Now I've heard it's different. I heard, all that kind of stuff. But back then it was a number 2 pencil on a Scantron.
Uh-huh.
There's a proctor in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It was incredibly intimidating. But I want to touch back on.
I didn't pass the first time.
Yeah, and I've taken many certifications in my career that I did not pass the first time. I had to take them over and over. And my advice to anyone taking certifications is, now, knowing everything I know, don't even study the first time you go in. Go in and take it, because there's a chance you could just pass. But more importantly, what you'll find is what's on the exam that you should study for.
Correct. Absolutely.
You'll gain more confidence. And now you got the failure thing out of your mind. You've already failed. Now that's behind you. Now just go in and take next time. The amount of cost sometimes for these certs, $150. Think about your time being valuable.
Yep.
And, the time that you'll save in studying things that you don't even need to worry about, because now that you've taken the test, you know what to focus on. So I tell everybody, go and take that test right away. It doesn't matter if you fail, just go and just take it. You might pass, but more importantly, you know what to study for. I'd like to go to one other question real quick here is, if you think back on your overall career, Bob, who had the biggest impact? Who was your mentor? Who did you go to for your career kind of growth and advice?
Back when I was with that large engineering firm, I was fortunate enough to work for a gentleman, and I don't know if we want names on here or not, and Joe. He was our CTO. And I was by title the enterprise architect and information security officer only by default, because the company didn't have one. And so they said, you do it. And that's where I started my training or my education as to take the CISSP. Joe has been a good mentor of mine over the years. Not as much in the last few years, because he's retired. But he was one where he had spent 20 years at a previous company. We'd been in a lot of the same industries together. And so he was a good go-to for that kind of thing. I would say some of my other mentors along the way have been other CISOs, other security professionals.
You mentioned that Orange County community has been a good way for you to network there. Okay.
Yeah. So
it's
been good for that. So
have you ever hired an entry level role before? Like in your, you've been in senior leadership positions in your security organizations. If you've ever built out a SOC, sometimes that SOC 1 analyst, just looking at all the alerts coming in, would you consider that an entry level role, or what would be a roles that someone without prior security experience can get into? What types of positions are those that someone can apply to?
If you wanted to go straight into security, typically somebody in security has already been like a desktop technician, or sometimes help desk technicians or help desk analysts are good, because they see the flow of whatever the problems are. A help desk person, a desktop person. I have hired into that. We actually had a program at another organization where we had a couple of college interns. And the interns, you're giving them the grunt work. It's like, hey, we've got this, long list of logs that we need to sift through. They've already been boiled down with the SIM or whatever tool you're using, and so they start learning on how to pull the logs out and start looking at it and start looking for patterns, looking for different anomalies within the log data. It's grunt work. It's like you hand somebody something that's got 10,000 rows in a spreadsheet, and you got to go start trying to sift through it or look through log data. And it gives them good exposure. So I've hired a few people coming out of those kind of scenarios where they just, again, it's the hunger. They thrive for it,
right?
And they start looking for it.
Larry, you are a U.S. Navy veteran. Thank you for your service. In some of those initial roles in the U.S. Navy, they don't necessarily give you the most glamorous roles first, right? You have to kind of work hard, do the grunt work, and work up, right?
Yeah, you start mopping the floor first. Yeah, so I mean, with anything, even in sports, you don't start off as a starter. You gotta work your butt off and continue to work your butt off. So no, that sounds about right. I think help desk or I think that's probably, or maybe support or something like that.
Bob, another question for knowing everything you know now, in your career, you've been exposed to, and Larry and I love talking about the type of roles in security. You've
Yeah.
got pen testers, you've got defensive folks, you've got SOC analysts, you've got all these types of roles. So knowing everything you know now about, you've been exposed to so much, right? Larry hasn't. Larry hasn't actually been exposed to all those different things. Knowing everything you know, what focus in security, if you could have start all over and start into it now, what path would you go into? If it's different than the path you took, what would be the first role that you'd probably dive into knowing everything you know now?
And this is going to be a good one for you, Joe, because it's something that you got me into about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago when we started doing business when I was with that large firm. The data forensics and the ethical hacking side of the world, because if you look at think about what a hacker's got to do. And so as a good security professional, you have to put on that mindset that, okay, if I was a hacker, how would I do this?
Right.
When we started getting into the depth of what Office 365 and that firm of, where we could go with doing the investigation, we had a breach and we needed to dig deep into our Microsoft portfolio and our Azure database. And I had engineers and really smart infrastructure guys that could do this, but I said, no, I want to do this too. And as the leader in the CISO, I was going shoulder to shoulder with these guys. So ethical hacking, looking at where the data came from. So if you can get involved in that, because there's a lot of tools and stuff. I've never been a coder, and I've told people, you don't want me to write code? Not a good idea. I learned COBOL years ago, again, aging myself. And so I would say getting into ethical hacking, and from an employment standpoint, we'll just leave it at that. An employment standpoint, get involved in something where you sometimes need to actually touch the gear. So from the network side, from penetration testing, but more of a compromise assessment kind of role where there's companies that come in, they'll put a little box on your network that sits between the outside and your inside and watches the traffic, and being able to digest all that traffic, looking for beacon traffic. I've had organizations where they didn't realize that they had systems inside that were basically trying to phone home to third world countries that nobody should be doing business with. And so getting involved in that, and it again, I think, and Joe, you remember Patrick from my previous organization. I sent him to ethical hacking school. I'm going to take you away from the fray for 2 weeks and send you. And it was a SANS class, and we paid the money for it. And he's probably said that was probably the most valuable thing we could have done for him.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the Microsoft technical solutions specialists in the field last year, they were told that they must pass the certified ethical hacker exam, which is a non-Microsoft exam, but they wanted them to have credibility with customers. And so they're now, the 3 in Southern California that I work with are now all certified ethical hackers. Larry is most excited about that part of security. So that's actually, I think, right, Larry, correct me if I'm wrong. That's
I want to get into the forensics and the forensics part of it, and the ethical hacking. Yeah, I'm kind of fired up about that.
I mean, you're going to see things, and we'll just say we had a breach. We couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Somebody had gotten into our Office 365 suite. They were spoofing one of our users with an outside customer. And it was just like our thing was, we needed to dig in and find out how they did it, where it came from, and then dig into the data. What data did they touch? Because from an organizational standpoint, there's a hole in the dam, you need to block the dam. Now you need to go to the other side of the dam and find out where the hole came from. And so if you look at those kind of mindsets and go after it. So Larry, there's a guy too, after a few conversations, I'll probably try to get you introduced to him, a guy named Chad Henderson. He's a huge Raiders fan himself. He's got a dog named Oakland, so good with that. But he's in here, in Orange County here. He has his own firm, and I've used him for years and years doing pen tests and compromise assessments. And dual degree, I think, in biology and chemistry, but best security guy outside of Joe that I've ever known. And he might be in a position to like, hey, I got some grunt work, you know, help us with some grunt work.
Everybody just needs a shot, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I would. Oh man, I would love that. Just
Yeah.
oh man.
Joe, I don't think you knew this, but I'm ex-Navy as well. So.
Oh, thank you for your service, Bob. Appreciate it. Yeah,
my
my dad is also ex-Navy. I've got his. He was on the. I've got his stuff right here. Show you some of this.
I've got my dad's flag up on the wall here. He's
Yeah, so he was on the Truxton.
Okay.
And the Norton Sound.
Okay.
Oh wow.
Yep. And,
yeah,
he was in Vietnam. He was like a tech. What do they call it? The fire control technician. So he would repair the big guns, and he taught me everything I know about troubleshooting, because he said sometimes he'd go on a ship and he'd never work on a particular weapon system before, and he had to figure it out basically through trial and error troubleshooting. And he was able to get these like layers of accommodation to get these guns back up and running and stuff. And he just, he wrote a nice technical paper on troubleshooting that is, I use in IT almost every day.
Very good.
As we kind of wrap up here, Bob, I know, I think for our listeners, that listen to this podcast, we've got a variety of audience members. Many of them are in existing roles in existing companies and stuff. And so they're actually looking for senior InfoSec leaders, which are hard to find, right? And so could you tell us a little bit about, right now, your career search? What are you looking for, Bob? You're currently open and looking. What's the ideal role for you and that you're looking for?
My ideal role, I think, would be one, employed. We'll leave it at that. We all know that. It's like if you're in the NFL, you want to play. It's like I want to be in the game. Anyway, you can edit that out. We'll start over. My ideal role would be in a leadership position with a firm that has maybe an established team, maybe not. I've been very successful in the past of going in and saying, or seeing a team or seeing an organization that they're getting ready to step off the pier, and we need to build a security organization. The network team, the infrastructure team have done well so far, but it's time to jump in and have our first security leader. I've had interviews with companies before, some that we know very well, and they'll remain nameless right now. I'll say it off the recording, who asked me, don't you want to be a CISO again? No, I want to be a leader again. If the CISO title is there, fine, but that's not important. I want to be able to make a difference somewhere. So big organizations, small, I've worked in them all. The last adventure I had, I was the only person in security, so I had to do everything. That was exciting. It was good to remember my roots, but being a leader of an organization, I think I have more success with being able to build a team. Pull the resources together, either hiring the people or hiring the right services to do that work.
And what is, as you look back on your career, what accomplishment are you most proud of in your career?
Most proud of, I think, is I went into an organization that they had gone through a pretty good shakeup in IT. I got hired in there as the senior director for security. They told me right away that security had been split into two groups. The compliance and policy side had been moved over to legal and HR, and the rest was left in IT. I was running the IT shop. I went in and there was two engineers that were currently on staff. The first week I was there, one of them quit, not because of me. He had already been working on it. So I had to rebuild the team from one person back up to the 12 that we had, approved. So had to rebuild the team. And so for the first 6 months, it was a lot of interviewing, a lot of that process, part of my day. But the other part of my day was keeping the lights on. It was me and an engineer. We had to do everything. And so when I'd hire people, I'd let them know it's like, there's no time here to get your feet wet. You got to jump in. And so I think building that up to a point where we had a new SIM deployed, we had a new endpoint protection deployed, we had a good process for policies and standards set up for the IT side. We were just getting ready to launch into our E5 side of the Microsoft suite. And we accomplished all that in about a year and a half.
That's incredible.
Up to 12 people. I got very fortunate with some of the hires I had. They're still there, where they knew me and they wanted to come work for me, and they're grateful for that. That's also the place where we had a couple of really good interns that ended up getting hired full time, which, they thought they just won the lottery coming out of college to get their first job as a security analyst, making north of 60K right out of college. So that was probably my greatest success. And I would say also some part of my worst, I don't want to say failures, but moving that organization to the next level, the company took a different direction. So I didn't get to see it go to full fruition.
Right. And sometimes, those are our greatest learning experience, right? I made a mistake in my IT career when I was being interviewed, and the CEO wanted me to talk about my failures. And I didn't want to admit my failures in an interview because I figured that would disqualify me. And he basically said, if you can't admit your failures to me, I'm not going to hire you because I need to learn what mistakes you've learned from. I hire people based on their what they've learned from, because then I know they won't repeat them here because they've learned from those things. And it was eye-opening to me that he wanted to kind of dig into that, right? So sometimes we learn from things like that. But as we kind of close and wrap up, Larry, do you have any additional questions for Bob? Anything you're kind of burning to ask here?
No, Bob, it was just so exciting to meet you and hear your story and all that.
Thank you.
Wow. I mean, somebody that's been in cybersecurity for over 20 years but just been in the whole business for a long time, kind of envious, because that's where my passion's at right now. So, but I'm very, very excited about learning more as much as I can.
Yeah, and my offer too, Larry, is out there. And Joe knows this, how I am and who I am. I've developed a lot of great relationships with vendors, with people that have done service with me before, but we've become friends. And you're in that circle now as well. So if you have any questions or you want to talk, or it's like, hey, you've got my email, and we'll hook up on LinkedIn. If you have a question, or hey, I want to try this or look at this, I can give you my best. And Joe, your thing about talking about your failures, another thing too that I run into, and this is part of the bigger career path. Don't get involved in, or don't get stuck on what industry you're in. Because I've been in automotive, I've been in healthcare, I've been in life sciences, I've been in mutual fund management companies, I've been in financial services, and in the security world, data is data. Yeah. It doesn't matter if it's healthcare data or customer data or PCI data or credit card data. It's still data. The ones and zeros didn't change. Yeah. The type of hacking that is done might involve more, because there's more tasty nuggets at the end that a hacker wants to go get. But the data is the data, and that hasn't changed. And so if you learn ethical hacking, if you learn security from a forensic standpoint, or even just a management view, the standards are the same. If you look at ISO and NIST and the bigger standards, all the little sub-standards out behind them, whether it be PCI or whatever the latest is going to be coming out of whatever swing the administration has, they're all born out of the ISO standard. If you boil them back down to it, they all come from there.
So Joe said, I'm very, very new to cybersecurity. So
Okay.
Actually, I'm studying right now at My Computer Career. So I studied the first, just the basic CompTIA A, just the hardware part of it. Then we went to MTA security, and then now we just finished, I think it was CompTIA 2000, CompTIA A 2000. So then now, so we're going to start Linux on Monday. I'm very, very green to cybersecurity. I do understand a lot of I'm understanding more of the terminology and stuff like that. So.
Okay. Yeah, it's a fun adventure. I think throughout my career, taking a path of security as a professional can go down many roads, and at some point you have to tell yourself, do I stay on the technical road and go down Linux and network and be in that layer? If you look at the ISO layers of an organization or of a technology, or you go into leadership or risk or management, or try to keep your feet in all of them, that's where it gets to be a pretty interesting dance. Joe is going to be a great mentor for you, and I'd like to join that list as well. If you ever have any questions or just want to, hey, what am I doing here? What's your thoughts on this? You've got my information. Call me.
That'd be, you know how awesome that is? That's like gold. And
thank you so much, Bob, for spending your Saturday morning with us. Just giving back to the community.
thank you so much, Bob.